There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't scream. It sits next to you on the bus. It walks with you through crowded streets. It holds your hand at parties, while you smile on the outside and quietly say goodbye on the inside. It's a loneliness no one else sees, but it knows you better than anyone. It shows up when you're surrounded by people, but still feel like no one's really there. When you speak, but no one truly hears. When you try so hard to be what they expect, and slowly disappear in the process. You're not alone because you lack people. You're alone because you drifted away from the parts of you that were called ugly, wrong, too much. You tried to fit in, you tried to please, and without noticing, you left your soul behind. This loneliness isn't weakness. It's memory. It's the longing for who you were before you learned you couldn't be. And maybe it's only here to help you find your way back. Hi, I'm Noah. This video isn't some big Hollywood production. It's just a way I found to share with you what I learned about myself today through what I've been learning from Carl Jung. Because maybe the moment I'm living through feels a lot like something you're living too. So if something I say here helps you feel a little less alone, just give it a like and subscribe to the channel. That way, YouTube understands that this kind of content matters to you, and it'll start showing you more of it. There are moments when you're surrounded by people, but it feels like no one really sees you. You laugh, you talk, you show up. But inside, there's a silence that screams. It's an inner silence that echoes through your body, even when everything outside looks fine. It's like there's an invisible wall between you and the world. No one notices, but you know, something's missing. And that emptiness doesn't come from a lack of company. It comes from being disconnected from something essential inside of you. This kind of loneliness doesn't begin when the house is quiet. It begins when you leave yourself behind. When you adapt too much, stay quiet too long, swallow too often. When you shape your voice to fit in, and little by little, lose touch with what you really feel. Your body stays present, but your soul drifts away. What's left is a symbolic emptiness, not just sadness, but a symbolic language the psyche uses when words no longer work. The loneliness you feel is often a message from the personal unconscious. It's trying to reach you, even in clumsy, painful ways. The psyche has its own language, and silence is one of its forms. Carl Jung said that the unconscious doesn't speak in words, but in images, sensations, and symbols. So when you feel invisible in the middle of a crowd, it may be a living symbol of a deeper psychological conflict, the disconnection between you and yourself. The self, in depth psychology, is the deep center that holds all of who you are, even the parts you've had to hide. And when you drift away from that center, loneliness becomes a painful compass. The psyche, through its natural process of self-regulation, tries to guide you back to your axis, sometimes with strange dreams, sometimes with anxiety, and sometimes through that heavy emptiness that no external presence can ever really fill. That silence may also be the shadow calling, the part of you that was pushed into darkness because someone told you it was wrong, weak, or too much. But it didn't disappear, it just hid. And now, when you feel that hollow ache in your chest, it might be the shadow asking to be seen, welcomed, integrated. The psychological reality of the shadow is that it was never here to sabotage you. It just wants to come home. There is nothing wrong with you for feeling this way. On the contrary, that discomfort is a sign that something alive is trying to surface. Jungian psychology sees these moments as invitations to reconnect with what was lost. Loneliness isn't a failure, it's a calling, a gentle push to turn inward and listen to what has been buried. Maybe it's not loneliness at all. Maybe it's just missing yourself. So breathe with tenderness, with courage, because it's not easy to face silence honestly. But that's where the real shadow work begins. And you're not alone in this. You're slowly coming back to the person you were before the world told you to pretend. And that, even in the middle of the ache, is the first step toward healing. There comes a time in life when you quietly ask yourself, who am I when no one's watching? And sometimes the answer is hard to hear, because we spend so much time trying to be what others expect, to please, to belong, to not disappoint, that we start confusing the mask with the face. Carl Jung called that mask the persona, the part of us we put on to survive in the world. But when the persona becomes all we show, it also starts to hide everything we truly feel. You might look strong, warm, balanced, but inside, there's a storm no one sees, and with that comes shame, guilt, the quiet belief that if someone saw the real you, they'd walk away. We learn early that feeling too much is weakness, that showing pain is drama, that being sensitive is a burden. So we start pushing those parts down. That's psychological repression. It's the psyche trying to protect you from rejection, but it's also how we lose touch with our psychic wholeness. The more you try to uphold the ego ideal, that perfect version of yourself you crafted to be accepted, the heavier it gets. Behind that image live all the rejected parts of the self that just want to be acknowledged. The anger you swallow, the sadness you pretend isn't there, the exhaustion you hide with a smile. All of it gets trapped and eventually turns into symptoms: anxiety, numbness, quiet breakdowns, and worst of all, a loneliness that grows even when you're not alone. The persona, when it forgets your truth, becomes a cage. It's meant to protect you, yes? But it can also become a wall that separates the ego from the shadow, the part of you holding everything you were taught to hide. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits for the moment you're tired of pretending and finally ready to let it return. That's where the individuation process begins. Not when you throw the mask away, but when you start remembering who you really are underneath it. This isn't about rejecting your persona. It's about making space for your truth, too. Healing doesn't come from perfection. It comes from inner balance. When the ego stops trying to control everything, and you begin listening to what the psyche is expressing through your inner conflicts, something starts to shift. Slowly, the mask no longer needs to hide you. It becomes just one part, not the whole. And in that space, something more honest can finally breathe. You are not a mistake. You're not too much. You're just tired of carrying a role. And that's okay. The ache you feel now might be the beginning of returning to yourself, to everything you had to leave behind just to be loved. Maybe you don't need to hide so much anymore. Maybe, just maybe, there's finally space to be seen, as you are. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself how many parts of you had to be hidden just to be accepted? How many desires you swallowed to avoid being too much? How many emotions you buried out of fear of being seen as weak, dramatic, or wrong? From early on, we learn to silence what we feel, not because we don't feel, but because feeling deeply makes others uncomfortable. That's when psychological repression begins, the constant effort to fit into a mold that was never made for your soul. Anger, sadness, tenderness, spontaneity, all of it slowly gets pushed aside as if it doesn't deserve to exist. But repressed things don't just vanish. They stay. They hide in the hidden parts of the self. And when those parts aren't given space to live, they start finding their way out through the back door. That's where unconscious behaviors begin. The ways you react without knowing why, repeat the same patterns, or sabotage the very things you long for. Underneath it all is the shadow, searching for a way to be seen. Carl Jung once said, "What is not brought to consciousness comes back as fate." And it's true, because the repressed desires and buried emotions you've tried to ignore don't die. They wait. And while they wait, they twist into other forms. Jealousy disguised as control, fear masked as anger, the longing for love dressed up as indifference. And if you feel like going a little deeper, I carefully prepared a gift for you. It may look small on the outside, but it goes deep. It was made for those quiet moments when you suddenly notice you're here, but not really present. You're breathing, but not really alive. Inside, you won't find answers or fixes, but you might find a way back. Back to the parts of you that got left behind. Back to the gentle voice you stopped listening to. Back to your true self. The one that still remembers who you are. Not a better version of yourself. Not a new version of yourself. Just a whole version of yourself. You'll find the link to your gift right there in the pinned comment. So, if your soul is tired of moving through life without really feeling it, if your soul is tired of waking up and not knowing why, click the link now. The psyche is always trying to self-regulate, but when it's not heard, it starts to scream. But there is a way back. It begins when you stop fighting what you feel, when you look inward with tenderness, and finally say, I see you. That's where emotional integration begins, not by forcing anything, but by allowing space. Psychic wholeness isn't made of perfect parts, but of honest ones. And to be whole, you'll need to make space for the parts you were taught to hide. Healing isn't about erasing what you feel. It's about naming it, about no longer running from what's still alive inside you. These unconscious impulses, these rejected parts of the self, they're not flaws. They're fragments of your story, pieces that may have once been cast out, but are now asking to come home. And the more you push them away, the louder they'll knock. But when you welcome them, they begin to soften. They begin to change. You're not weak for feeling too much. You're not wrong for wanting what you were taught to deny. You just learned too early to hide what was real. And maybe now, it's time to unlearn that. To remember that feeling is part of healing. That looking honestly at your shadow can in fact set you free. Because what lives in silence inside you doesn't want to destroy you. It just wants to be heard. There's a kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with people or even love. It's the absence of yourself. A quiet ache that shows up when what you present to the world no longer matches what you feel inside. Life goes on. You play the roles, smile in the pictures, say you're fine. But deep down, there's a restlessness that doesn't leave. And no matter how hard you try to distract yourself, it comes back. It always comes back. Because it's not coming from the outside. It's the result of an inner split. Carl Jung believed that when we drift too far from our inner truth, the psyche finds symbolic ways to call us back. And loneliness, in this case, is one of those ways. It's as if the collective unconscious is whispering, "You've forgotten who you are." And that message doesn't arrive in words. It comes in symptoms, in that tightness in your chest, in the feeling of being misplaced, even when surrounded by people. It's a symbolic language, and it asks to be heard, gently but honestly. The ego, that part of us that seeks order, control, and consistency, doesn't always want to recognize the personal shadow, because the shadow holds everything you were told to hide. Pain, fear, impulses, traits that didn't fit in. But when the ego tries to keep total control and denies the shadow, the psyche reacts. And it speaks in the form of anxiety, nameless fear, a fatigue that can't be explained. This split between ego and shadow creates an archetypal imbalance, a tension between the living archetypes within you. And in that space, loneliness becomes the symbolic reflection of the conflict. The soul senses the fracture long before the mind catches up, and the body answers with insomnia, unease, or that heavy silence that wraps around your chest. Psychological reality begins to show itself in ordinary life, if you listen. Feeling this doesn't make you broken. It makes you alive. It means your soul is still breathing, that there are parts of you still waiting to come home. When you suppress what you feel, it doesn't vanish. It just moves inward. But the psyche remembers, and it will keep trying to remind you of your wholeness. sometimes gently, sometimes through pain, but always with the intention to heal. Maybe the loneliness you feel isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning of a return to parts that were forgotten, to an inner voice that's finally ready to speak. And if you're willing to listen, you'll realize you're not broken, just divided. And this split can be mended with time, with truth, with love, because you deserve to feel whole again. And the shadow, no matter how dark it seems, carries light too, light that was hidden out of fear, but never left you. It's still there, waiting for you to come back. Some days, everything looks normal on the outside, but inside, there's an emptiness you can't explain. Nothing dramatic happened, nothing visible has changed, and yet it feels like something disappeared, like your soul quietly left for a while. The worst part is that this emptiness has no name. It just shows up, quiet, heavy, and you try to distract yourself. Try to keep your mind busy. Try to pretend it's not there. But it is, because that emptiness is real, and maybe it's a message. Carl Jung said, the unconscious speaks through symbols. And sometimes, the symbolic language of the psyche doesn't come in dreams or images. It comes in sensations, that heavy silence, the urge to hide, the tiredness that won't go away. All of this may be the shadow trying to communicate, an unconscious expression that rises when you drift too far from yourself, when the parts of you that were pushed aside begin to call you back. In that sense, the emptiness isn't an end. It's the beginning of a conversation, a form of unconscious communication, trying to remind you of something essential, that you're becoming disconnected from yourself. And as frightening as that may feel, this emptiness could be a recurring symbol, a way your soul says, there are still parts of you waiting to be seen. And those parts can only be healed if they're heard, truthfully. We're often afraid to face this because we don't know what we'll find. We assume we'll find only pain. But what lives in the personal unconscious isn't just suffering, it's also power, truth, vitality. These unconscious contents hold everything you left behind, your desires, emotions, intuitions. And when they have no room to breathe, they become shadow. But when you stop to listen, they become reconnection. The shadow doesn't speak in shouts. It speaks in silence, in stillness that aches, in pauses you try to ignore. But they come back, again and again, because the psyche longs for integration, for wholeness. And emptiness, in that sense, is just an opening, a space where something new can be born, if you're brave enough not to fill it too quickly. If you let the unknown show you something you haven't yet understood. You don't need to have all the answers now. You just need to be willing to listen, because the soul speaks, and even if your mind doesn't understand, your body does. Emptiness isn't absence, it's symbolic presence. It's the psyche's quiet invitation to come back home. And if you accept it, maybe something new will begin to rise inside you. There's a kind of pain that comes when you offer the most sensitive part of yourself, hoping someone will hold it, and they don't. When you give your whole heart and still feel like it's never enough. That quiet sense of exclusion, of not fitting, of not knowing who you are anymore within the space of a relationship. You start to think the problem is always them, or maybe always you. But maybe, just maybe, the pain goes deeper. Maybe what you're aching to receive is something you once had to bury inside. Carl Jung said that what we refuse to see in ourselves, we start seeing in others and needing from them. That's psychological projection, an unconscious mechanism that throws outward what the psyche couldn't yet hold inward. These are the rejected parts of the self still alive, still longing, but with no place to exist. So they try to live through other people. They beg to be validated, to be seen, to be saved. But deep down, that's not love. It's emotional hunger trying to heal itself outside. We project because we need to, because the soul misses what was left behind. And that absence turns into unconscious behavior, emotional dependency, idealization, pressure, relationships, where the other is forced to carry an expectation they can never meet. These are unconscious patterns that repeat not because you want them to, but because the psyche is trying to compensate for what was lost. That's unconscious compensation, and it only begins to fade when you start turning inward with truth. In that light, loneliness isn't just the absence of another, it's the absence of yourself. Because as long as you hand someone else the responsibility to complete you, you grow more and more distant from your own identity. And the more you expect from the outside what only you can give yourself, the more empty you feel. It's a cycle, and it only begins to dissolve when you see that the pain isn't punishment. It's a quiet call to return. You are not wrong for wanting love. You're not weak for needing care. You're just trying to retrieve parts of yourself that had to be left behind. And the shadow holds those parts. It knows where they are, and it shows them to you, not in words, but in repetition, in heartbreak, in the same stories, showing up again and again until you realize what you long for in the other is what you most need to offer back to yourself. The psyche never gives up on wholeness. Even when it tries shortcuts like projection, it's only doing what it can to come home. So next time you feel unseen by someone, ask gently, what part of me is asking to be seen? Because maybe healing doesn't come from being chosen, but from choosing yourself. There's a part of you that was left in the dark, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear of not being accepted, of being too much, of being vulnerable. That part was silenced, pushed deep down, but it never stopped existing. It waited patiently, like something inside you knew you'd come back. That's the hidden self, the part of your soul that still holds your truth, even when you've forgotten. And the moment you return to it, that's when real transformation begins. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That is shadow work, a symbolic process, one that doesn't avoid pain. It listens to it. And when you begin to listen with presence, you realize that what seemed broken actually carries a strength you never imagined. The psyche is wise. It hides things not to punish you, but to protect you. But now, maybe there's space to transform. This transformation isn't magic. It's inner alchemy, a deep process that happens in the quiet of the soul. It starts when you stop running from what you feel and begin translating the symbols life has been offering. A recurring pain, a strange dream, a pattern you keep repeating. All of this is symbolic listening. They're ways your psyche says, there's something here asking to be seen with love. And when you allow yourself to listen, something inside begins to shift. In this listening, opposites begin to soften. The part of you that wants control, and the part that just wants to feel. Your strength and your tenderness, your fear and your courage. When these opposites meet, they create the transcendent function, a bridge between what once seemed irreconcilable. And you realize you don't have to choose between being strong or sensitive. You can be both. You can be whole. This inner journey is intimate. It belongs only to you. But you're not walking it alone. Your psyche walks with you. And the symbol of the self, the deep center that holds your totality, quietly guides you, even through the dark. To reunite with the hidden self is to return to who you were before you had to split yourself to fit. It's the beginning of no longer rejecting. It's the beginning of embracing. You don't need to hide anymore. What once looked like darkness is now light, still becoming. What once felt like pain is now a threshold. Inner alchemy doesn't erase the wounds. It turns them into wisdom. And that wisdom lives in you. It always has. Loneliness begins to shift when you stop waiting for someone else to save you and begin to meet yourself fully. Not in some ideal way, but in a real one. by accepting your strange parts, your contradictions, your intensity, by integrating your pain, your shame, your story. Because the deepest sense of presence doesn't come from outside, it comes from within. And when you welcome the rejected parts of the self, that hollow feeling begins to change into something else, inner companionship. Carl Jung said, the soul's journey is the journey toward wholeness. And psychic wholeness isn't about perfection, it's about integration. Shadow integration means stopping the hiding, the suppressing, the running. It means sitting down with what's been exiled, listening with tenderness, and slowly letting those parts come back home. When that happens, something shifts inside the psyche. It begins to reorganize itself, and the silence that once felt like pain becomes fertile ground. The kind of presence that's born from this listening is different. It's quieter, steadier, because it doesn't rely on someone else's presence to exist. It's you, with yourself. A reconnection that brings psychological healing, emotional maturity, and peace. Not a peace that numbs, but one that welcomes, that holds space for what's real, that knows the heart also needs shelter inside its own chest. Loneliness doesn't vanish. It transforms into stillness, into presence, into inner dialogue, and sometimes into a silence that no longer suffocates, one that gently reminds you something is alive in there. Because when the psyche feels heard, it stops screaming and starts guiding. Self-realization isn't about arriving somewhere. It's about coming home with more softness, more honesty. It's the birth of psychological maturity, the quiet knowing that you don't have to be perfect, just true. And pain, when listened to with soul, becomes a bridge. You don't need to fix yourself. Just stay with yourself. And that already is healing. It's love. It's enough. And if something I said reminded you of your own story or stirred something inside you, feel free to share it in the comments. I'd really love to hear it. What you have to say matters, not just to me, but maybe to someone else who's going through something similar. Sometimes putting it into words is already part of the healing. If something inside you still wants to understand yourself, there's another video waiting for you on the screen. And maybe what's in there is exactly what you've been needing to hear. Click it, if that's where your soul is asking to go.